The plane touched down with a jolt that rattled my teeth. I gripped the armrests, knuckles white, as the small aircraft skidded across the icy runway before finally slowing to a crawl. Outside the frosted window, nothing but white stretched in every direction, broken only by the dark smudges of distant pine trees. Welcome to Whitmore, Alaska. Population: who the hell knows? My new home for the foreseeable future. I grabbed my duffel from the overhead compartment and followed the handful of other passengers down the narrow aisle. The cold hit me like a physical blow the moment I stepped onto the metal stairs. My breath clouded in front of my face as I hurried toward the tiny terminal building. The February wind cutting through my jacket like it wasn't even there. Inside wasn't much warmer. The terminal consisted of a single room with a few plastic chairs, a vending machine, and a bored-looking guy behind a counter. I stamped my feet to get some feeling back in my toes and looked around for whoever was supposed to pick me up. A man in a heavy police parka stood by the exit, arms crossed over his chest. He looked to be in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in harsh conditions. When he spotted me, he didn't smile or wave, just gave a curt nod. "Officer Diaz?" he asked as I approached. "Yes, sir." I extended my hand. "Michael Diaz." He shook it firmly. "Chief Alex Lewis, cars outside." And that was it for introductions. I followed him out into the cold, where an aging police SUV sat idling in the small parking lot, exhaust billowing in the frigid air. Lewis tossed my duffel in the back and climbed into the driver's seat without another word. As we pulled away from the airport, I tried to get a feel for the place through the frosted windows. Not much to see, just snow, trees, and more snow. The road looked barely maintained, and Lewis drove with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly where every patch of black ice might be hiding. "First time in Alaska?" he finally asked, eyes never leaving the road. "Yes, sir. Spent most of my career in Michigan before this. Michigan winters won't prepare you for this." He said it matter-of-factly, not like he was trying to scare me. "We hit 40 below last week. That's without wind chill." I nodded, unsure what to say to that. The heater in the SUV was working overtime, but I could still feel the cold seeping in through the windows. After about 20 minutes of silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the radio, Lewis reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card. He handed it to me without looking. "Memorize these," he said. "They'll keep you alive." I took the card, expecting to see safety protocols for extreme weather or maybe emergency contact information. Instead, I found 5 numbered rules. 1. If you hear laughing inside the station after dark, leave immediately. 2. If you see someone with no face in the woods, don't move until they leave. 3. Don't acknowledge the whispers. 4. Never open your door if someone knocks after midnight. 5. Always feed the black cat if it crosses your path. I stared at the card, waiting for Lewis to crack a smile or tell me it was some kind of initiation joke. When I looked up, his expression remained deadly serious, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Is this some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy?" I asked with a nervous laugh. Lewis took his eyes off the road just long enough to give me a look that made my smile fade. "Officer Diaz, I don't have time for hazing rituals. Those rules kept me alive for 26 years in Whitmore. They'll do the same for you if you follow them." The way he said it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I looked back down at the card, reading the rules again. They sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. "Officer Hamilton will explain everything in more detail," Lewis continued. "She's been here 8 years, knows what she's doing." I slipped the card into my pocket, deciding to play along for now. Every small town had its quirks and superstitions. This was probably just Whitmore's version. We drove into what passed for the town center, a short main street with a handful of buildings on either side. A diner, a general store, what looked like a post office, and a few other businesses I couldn't identify. Most had lights on despite the early hour, warm glows against the gray morning. Lewis pulled up in front of a small, sturdy-looking building with Whitmore Police Department written across the front. It was a single-story structure with narrow windows and a metal roof piled with snow. "Home, sweet home," Lewis said, killing the engine. "Get settled in. Hamilton will take you on patrol this afternoon." The station inside was warmer than I expected, with fluorescent lighting that hummed overhead. A small reception area led to an open room with 4 desks, only one of which looked regularly used. A coffee maker gurgled in the corner next to a mini fridge, and a bulletin board covered in notices hung on the far wall. Lewis showed me to an empty desk. "This is yours. Locker room's through there. Your apartment is upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's included with the job." I set my duffel on the desk. "Thanks, Chief. When do I meet Officer Hamilton?" "She'll be in around noon. Get your gear squared away until then." Lewis headed toward what I assumed was his office, then paused at the door. "And Diaz?" "Yes, sir." "Those rules. They're not a joke." With that, he disappeared into his office, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the strange laminated card burning a hole in my pocket. I spent the next few hours unpacking and getting familiar with the station. My apartment upstairs was small but functional, a studio with a kitchenette, a bed, a couch, and a tiny bathroom. The windows looked out over the main street, giving me a view of the handful of people bundled against the cold as they went about their business. At exactly noon, the station door opened and a woman walked in. She was in her mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair cut in a practical bob and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore the same police uniform as Lewis, with additional layers for the cold. "You must be Diaz," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Christina Hamilton." "Michael," I replied, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you." She nodded, already moving toward the coffee pot. "Lewis said you're from Michigan. That's good. At least you know what snow looks like. Last guy we got was from Arizona. Lasted 3 days before he packed up." Hamilton poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to me, and took a long sip from her own. "Lewis give you the rules?" I patted my pocket. "Got them right here." "Good. You ready to see the town?" I grabbed my coat. "Lead the way." Outside, the day had brightened somewhat, though the sun remained hidden behind a blanket of gray clouds. Hamilton led me to another police SUV, this one with chains on the tires. "We'll take my car," she said. "Better in the snow." As we drove slowly down the main street, Hamilton pointed out the key locations: the general store that doubled as a pharmacy, the diner that served as the town's only restaurant, the small clinic staffed by a single doctor and 2 nurses. 400 people live here, give or take, she explained as we turned onto a residential street lined with small houses. Most work at the lumber mill or the fishing operation when the lake isn't frozen. Some hunt and trap. Everyone knows everyone, which makes our job easier in some ways, harder in others. I nodded, taking mental notes. Seems pretty quiet. Usually is. We get the standard stuff: domestic disputes, drunk and disorderly, occasional theft. But that's not what you need to worry about. She turned onto a narrow road that led toward the edge of town, where the houses thinned out and the forest pressed closer. "The rules Lewis gave you. They're what keep you alive here." I looked at her, trying to gauge if she was serious. Her expression gave nothing away. "About those rules," I said carefully. "They seem a little, unusual." Hamilton's eyes stayed fixed on the road. 3 officers ignored them in the time I've been here. None lasted a week. A chill ran down my spine despite myself. "What happened to them?" "They transferred out. Immediately." Her tone made it clear there was more to the story, but she wasn't sharing it. We drove in silence for a few minutes before Hamilton pulled over at a spot where the forest came right up to the road. She cut the engine and turned to face me. "Look, Diaz, I know how this sounds. I thought the same thing when I got here. But Whitmore isn't like other places. Things happen here that don't make sense. The rules help you navigate that. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just nodded. Hamilton seemed satisfied with that response. She started the car again and headed back toward town. As we approached the police station, she slowed the car to a crawl and pointed at the building. "Rule number 1 is the most important," she said, her voice deadly serious. "If you hear laughing inside the station after dark, a child laughing, you get out. Don't investigate. Don't try to find the source. You leave, and you call me or Lewis." I stared at her, waiting for some indication that this was all an elaborate prank. Her face remained grave, eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Got it," I said finally. "Good." She pulled into the station parking lot. "We'll go over the other rules as they become relevant. For now, just remember number 1. The rest of my first week in Whitmore passed without incident. I handled a noise complaint at the diner, helped an elderly woman who had locked herself out of her house, and wrote up a fender bender in the general store parking lot. Normal, small-town police work. Lewis and Hamilton seemed competent and professional. Besides the strange rules, everything about the Whitmore Police Department appeared to be standard procedure. We patrolled. We filed reports. We drank too much coffee. By day 7, I'd started to relax. The rules, I figured, were just local folklore, a way to keep newcomers on their toes, maybe even a psychological test to see how we handled unusual situations. The serious way Lewis and Hamilton treated them was probably just commitment to the bit. As I sat at my desk that evening, finishing paperwork before heading up to my apartment, I couldn't help but smile to myself. I'd been worried over nothing. Whitmore might be remote and freezing cold, but it was just a small town like any other. I tucked the laminated rule card into my desk drawer, convinced I wouldn't need it. After all, I'd been a cop for 10 years. I knew the real rules of the job. Be alert, be prepared, and don't take unnecessary risks. The folklore could stay in the drawer where it belonged. I scraped at the windshield of my patrol car, the ice giving way reluctantly under the plastic edge of my scraper. The night air bit through my gloves, making my fingers stiff as I worked. 8 night shifts in, and I still hadn't adjusted to the brutal cold of Whitmore after dark. The station sat quiet behind me, its windows glowing with fluorescent light against the darkness. I'd left my coffee inside, planning to grab it once I finished with the windshield. Just a few more scrapes and I'd be... A laugh broke the silence, high-pitched, childlike, coming from inside the station. I paused, scraper held mid-stroke, listening. Maybe I'd imagined it. Then it came again. A clear, delighted giggle that made the hair on my arms stand up despite the layers I wore. Rule number 1 flashed through my mind. Leave immediately if you hear laughing after dark. The laughter grew louder, seeming to bounce off the walls inside the station. My chest tightened as the sound carried through the closed doors and windows, reaching me in the parking lot with unnatural clarity. I dropped the scraper and backed away from the building, fumbling for my radio with numb fingers. "Owens," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm at the station and I..." The laughter cut through again, higher and more frantic. "I hear it," I finished, my breath clouding in front of my face. Owens's response came immediately, her voice tight with urgency. "Get in your car right now. Do not go back inside. Drive to my house. Now, Michael." I didn't need to be told twice. I yanked open the driver's door, slid inside, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, the laughter seemed to follow me, hanging in the air even as I put distance between myself and the station. The drive to Owens's cabin took 15 minutes along dark, winding roads. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. Nothing did, but the memory of that laughter stayed with me, playing on repeat in my head. Owens's cabin sat at the edge of town, a small wooden structure with smoke curling from the chimney. I parked next to her SUV and waited, engine running, heater blasting. 5 minutes later, she emerged from the front door, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She approached my car and motioned for me to roll down the window. "You You okay?" she asked, handing me one of the mugs. I took it gratefully, wrapping my fingers around the warmth. "Yeah." "What the hell was that?" "That," she said, leaning against my car door, "was why we have Rule 1. "A kid's laugh?" I asked. "In an empty police station?" Owens took a long sip of her coffee before answering. "I've heard it twice in 8 years. Both times I did exactly what you did tonight. I got out and stayed out." "What happens if you don't?" Her face hardened. 3 officers didn't follow that rule. They went back inside to investigate. We found them the next morning sitting at their desks, staring at nothing. They wouldn't talk, wouldn't move without being guided. All 3 were transferred to psychiatric facilities within days. I swallowed hard, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter. "What caused it? You really want to know?" Owens asked, studying my face. "Yeah, I do." She sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "I don't know exactly what it is. None of us do. But it's not a child, Michael. It's never been a child." We stayed there for the rest of my shift, parked outside her cabin. Owens went back inside but checked on me hourly, bringing fresh coffee and sitting with me while I processed what had happened. By the time dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in pale pink light, the incident felt almost dreamlike, except for the lingering chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. 2 weeks passed without incident. I handled the usual calls, a fender bender at the general store, noise complaints from the diner, checking on elderly residents after a particularly heavy snowfall. The laughter faded to the back of my mind, though I never stayed in the station alone after dark. Then came the day I encountered Rule Number 2. I was investigating reports of property damage near the forest edge. Someone had torn down sections of a fence marking private property. The owner, an older man named Erickson, had called it in that morning, claiming it was the 3rd time it had happened. The damage looked odd, not cut with tools but torn, as if something had pulled the wooden posts from the frozen ground with considerable force. I took photos, made notes in my report, and was about to head back to my car when movement at the tree line caught my eye. About 50 yards away, partially hidden among the trees, stood a figure. Tall, too tall to be human, with limbs that hung at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale, almost translucent in the afternoon light. I instinctively reached for my weapon, then froze as I remembered Rule 2. Don't move if you see a faceless person in the woods. The figure took a step forward, emerging from the shadows of the trees, and my breath caught. Where its face should have been was nothing, just smooth, featureless skin stretched over what approximated a head. My heart hammered in my chest as I stood perfectly still, not even blinking as the creature tilted its head, studying me. It took another step forward, mimicking my stance. Feet slightly apart, arms at sides. Then it raised one hand slowly, exactly as I had my right hand positioned near my holster. We stayed like that, locked in a bizarre mirror game, as minutes crawled by. The cold air burned my lungs, but I didn't dare move. Not even when the figure took another step closer, its movements jerky and wrong, like it was learning how to use its limbs. 20 minutes passed with me standing rigid, muscles cramping from the strain of remaining motionless. The faceless figure continued to mirror me, occasionally tilting its head as if puzzled by my stillness. Finally, after what felt like hours, it seemed to lose interest. It lowered its arm, took 3 backward steps, then turned with an unnatural fluidity and disappeared into the forest. I remained frozen, counting slowly in my head. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Only when I reached 10 did I allow myself to exhale fully, my muscles screaming in relief. Carefully, watching the tree line for any movement, I backed toward my patrol car. I didn't turn my back to the forest until I reached the vehicle, and even then I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. Inside the car, I sat with shaking hands on the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd seen. The faceless figure had been real as the torn fence posts and the frozen ground beneath my feet, as real as the child's laughter in an empty police station. I started the engine but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I stared at the forest edge, half expecting the figure to reappear. It didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, waiting just beyond the trees. Lewis and Owens hadn't been testing me with those rules. They hadn't been maintaining some local tradition or playing an elaborate joke. They had been trying to keep me alive. I woke up to knocking, 3 sharp raps on my apartment door, precise and deliberate. My phone showed 2 a.m, and the darkness outside my window confirmed it. I sat up, instantly alert, wondering who'd be at my door at this hour in Whitmore. The knocking came again. Same pattern, same intensity. I grabbed my gun from the nightstand drawer and moved quietly to the door, staying to the side of it. "Hello?" A woman's voice called from the other side. It sounded wrong. The pitch was perfect, the tone musical, but something about it made my skin crawl. "My car broke down on the main road. I need to use a phone, please." Every word was pronounced with unnatural clarity, like someone reading from a script they'd practiced too many times. I thought about the laminated card with the 5 rules. Rule 4, never open the door to knocks after midnight. "I can see your light is on," the voice continued, still eerily melodic. "Please help me. I'm all alone out here." I took a step back, keeping my gun trained on the door. "I'll call someone to help you," I said, not moving toward the handle. "Just open the door," the voice insisted, losing some of its musical quality. "I only need to use your phone for a minute." I reached for my cell phone with my free hand and called Owens. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "There's someone at my door," I said quietly. "A woman saying her car broke down. It's 2 a.m. Owens was instantly alert. "Don't open the door. I'm on my way. Keep talking to her, but stay inside." I hung up and called out. "Help is coming. They'll be here soon." The knocking stopped. For several long seconds, there was silence. Then I heard what sounded like nails. Long, hard nails, dragging slowly down the outside of my door. "I just need to come inside," the voice said, dropping any pretense of normalcy. The words stretched and distorted like tape playing at the wrong speed. "Open the door now." I backed away further, gun still raised. "Help is on the way." The scratching sound intensified, moving around the door frame. I heard wood splintering. "Let me in," the voice hissed, no longer even trying to sound human. "Let me in now." For 15 minutes, I stood in my living room, gun pointed at the door, listening to the scratching and occasional hissing demands. Then I heard Owens's SUV pull up outside, its engine cutting through the night silence. The scratching stopped immediately. Heavy footsteps came up the stairs to my apartment. Then Owens knocked. "Diaz? It's me." I checked through the peephole before opening the door. Owens stood there in her police jacket, hand on her holstered weapon, looking past me into the apartment. "You okay?" she asked, stepping inside. "Yeah. Whatever it was, it left when it heard your car." Owens nodded and pulled out a flashlight, examining my door frame. "Look at this." Deep gouges ran along the wood around my door, 4 parallel lines that cut nearly half an inch into the solid frame. They ran all the way around, top to bottom, like something had been trying to claw its way in. "What the hell could do that?" I asked, running my fingers over the splintered wood. "We don't give it a name," Owens said, her face grim in the flashlight beam. "But it's tried this before. 3 years ago, a tourist, staying at the bed and breakfast, opened his door when it knocked." She paused. "We found pieces of him scattered across 3 rooms." I swallowed hard. Jesus. "You did the right thing," she said, turning off her flashlight. "That's why we have the rules." "But what is it? Some kind of animal?" Owens shook her head. Animals don't knock on doors and ask to use your phone. She looked at the gouges again. I'll have Lewis bring some boards tomorrow to fix this. For tonight, push your dresser in front of the door. After Owens left, I did exactly that, shoving my heavy dresser against the door. I sat on my bed for the rest of the night, gun in my lap, listening for any sound outside. Sleep wasn't an option. A month passed. The claw marks around my doorframe had been covered with new wood, but I knew what lay underneath. Every night when I locked my door, I ran my fingers over the fresh paint, remembering. I was working the night shift at the station, catching up on paperwork. The clock on the wall read 11:30, and I was the only one in the building. The heating system clicked and hummed, pushing warm air through the vents. I got up to make coffee, walking past the empty desks toward the small break room. As I passed Lewis's office, I heard something, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. Michael. I froze. The voice was unmistakable. My father's voice. My father who had died 5 years ago from a heart attack. Michael, I need to talk to you. The whisper came from behind me now, near the front door. I turned, scanning the empty room, my hand moving to my holster. Rule 3. Don't acknowledge the whispers. I continued to the break room, my heart pounding. I poured water into the coffee maker with shaking hands, trying to focus on the simple task. Son, please, I don't have much time. My father's voice again, closer now, right beside my ear. I gripped the edge of the counter, staring straight ahead at the coffee maker as it began to gurgle. I know you can hear me, Michael. I grabbed my mug and walked back to my desk, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. The whispers followed me. Why are you ignoring me? This time it was my mother's voice, soft and hurt. Michael, we miss you. I sat down, opened a file, and started typing, focusing on the screen in front of me. You always were stubborn. My ex-wife's laugh, exactly as I remembered it. Remember that weekend in Chicago? When we got caught in the rain? I kept typing, though my fingers were trembling now. The whispers continued, moving around the room, sometimes close enough that I could feel cold breath on my neck, sometimes farther away near the windows or the front door. Hey, Mike! My college roommate's voice now. Remember that time we broke into the swimming pool? Man, we were wasted. The voices cycled through people I knew, living and dead, each one perfectly mimicking their speech patterns, bringing up memories only they would know. For an hour, I sat at my desk, pretending to work while the whispers circled me like hungry sharks. With steady hands, I picked up my phone and called Owens. The whispers, I said when she answered. They're here. Don't respond to them, she said immediately. Don't look toward them. Don't answer them. Don't even react. I haven't, I said, keeping my voice level. But they've been at it for an hour now, using voices of people I know. They'll give up eventually if you keep ignoring them. They feed on recognition. Acknowledgement makes them stronger. She paused. I can come in if you need me to. No, I said, watching as a shadow moved across the wall, even though nothing was there to cast it. No, I can handle it. You sure? Yeah. I kept my eyes on my computer screen. I'm learning the rules now. After I hung up, the whispers continued for another 20 minutes, growing more desperate, more personal. Then, as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The station fell silent except for the hum of the heating system and the ticking of the wall clock. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. 4 rules down, I thought. I was starting to understand why Lewis and Owens had survived so long in this town. The rules weren't superstitions or traditions. They were survival strategies. I looked at the darkness beyond the station windows, wondering what else waited out there, what other rules I'd need to learn. Whitmore was teaching me its secrets, one terrifying lesson at a time. I was on patrol when a black cat darted across the road in front of my cruiser. I hit the brakes, remembering Rule 5 on the card. Always feed a black cat crossing your path. After the faceless figure in the woods and the nighttime visitor at my door, I wasn't taking any chances with the rules. I pulled over to the shoulder, engine idling. The cat stopped at the edge of the pavement, turned, and sat down. It stared at me with yellow eyes that looked too knowing for a regular stray. Okay then, I muttered. I reached for the lunch bag on my passenger seat. Inside was half a turkey sandwich I'd been saving for later. The cat watched me through the windshield, not moving. I stepped out of the car, the April air cool but nowhere near the bone-chilling cold of winter. The cat remained perfectly still as I approached, only its tail twitching slightly against the asphalt. "This is ridiculous," I said, even as I unwrapped the sandwich and placed it on the ground a few feet from the cat. "But I guess that's Whitmore for you." The cat approached the food cautiously, sniffed it, then began eating with delicate bites. I stood there feeling foolish, watching a stray eat my lunch while I remembered the other rules I'd already encountered. The laughter at the station, the faceless thing in the woods, the whispers, the knocks at midnight. When the cat finished, it looked up at me and blinked slowly. Then it turned and walked into the underbrush at the side of the road, disappearing from view. I got back in my car, shaking my head. "Hope that was worth my lunch," I said to no one. I continued my patrol, driving past the general store and the diner, checking in on the usual spots where locals gathered. It was quiet, as most April days were in Whitmore. The winter tourists had gone, and summer visitors hadn't arrived yet. 2 hours later, I got a call about a noise complaint behind the post office. "Probably kids," the dispatcher said. I acknowledged and headed that way, parking in the small lot next to the building. The post office was a single-story structure with a loading dock in the back. I walked around to the rear, flashlight in hand, even though it was still daylight. The space behind the building was empty. No kids, no obvious source of noise. I was about to call it in as a false alarm when I noticed movement in the shadows near the dumpster. Something was there, partially hidden. "Police," I called. "Come on out where I can see you." The figure stepped forward, and I felt my hand instinctively move toward my holster. It looked like a woman, or something shaped like a woman. She wore what might have been a dress, but the fabric seemed to shift and change as she moved. Her skin was pale to the point of translucence, but what made me take a step back were her eyes. Pure white, glowing slightly, with no iris or pupil. Her mouth stretched too wide across her face, revealing far too many teeth. My throat went dry. I'd faced down armed suspects before, but nothing had prepared me for this. The woman, the thing, took another step toward me, head tilting at an unnatural angle. She sniffed the air like she was catching my scent. Her too wide mouth turned down in what looked like disappointment. Then, as I watched, she began to fade. Not walk away, not run, but literally fade, becoming transparent until she vanished completely. I stood frozen for several seconds, my heart pounding in my chest. When I was sure she was gone, I pulled out my phone with a shaking hand and called Owens. "I just saw something," I said when she answered. "Behind the post office. A woman, but not human. White eyes, too many teeth." She sniffed at me and then disappeared. "Did you feed the cat today?" Owens asked immediately. "Yeah, about 2 hours ago. It crossed my path on Main." I heard Owens exhale. "You're okay then. That's why she left you alone." "What was it?" "We don't have a name for her. She shows up every few months. Takes people who haven't fed the guardian." "The black cat is a guardian?" "Something like that," Owens said. "The cat marks you as protected. The white-eyed woman hunts those who aren't marked." I leaned against the wall of the post office, suddenly feeling the adrenaline crash. What would have happened if I hadn't fed it? "You wouldn't be calling me right now." Owen said simply. "Stay there. I'll come meet you." I waited by my car, scanning the shadows constantly until Owens pulled up 10 minutes later. She got out of her SUV looking completely calm, as if we were meeting for coffee instead of discussing supernatural predators. "You okay?" she asked, studying my face. "Yeah, shaken up but fine." She nodded. "First time seeing her is always rough, but you did good. You followed the rule." "How many more of these things are there?" I asked. "More than we've named," she said. "Some we see regularly, others only show up every few years." "And the rules keep us safe?" "Most of the time." She looked around the empty lot. "Sometimes new things show up that we don't have rules for yet. That's when it gets tricky." We walked the area behind the post office, but found nothing unusual. No footprints, no sign that the white-eyed woman had ever been there. After filing a report that mentioned suspicious person left area before contact, we went back to our separate patrols. As April turned to May and then June, the days grew longer and warmer. Summer brought tourists to Whitmore, hikers, fishermen, and families looking to escape the heat of southern cities. It also brought more encounters with the strange things that lived in or around Whitmore. On a warm evening in late June, I responded to a call from the Pinewood Inn, the town's only hotel. A family of 4 from California was checking out 3 days early, insisting their room was haunted. When I arrived, the father was loading suitcases into their rental car while the mother kept the 2 children close. "Officer," the man said when he saw me. "Thank God. We need to leave this place." "What happened?" I asked, keeping my tone professional and calm. The woman stepped forward. "We saw my mother last night, standing behind a tree when we were walking back from dinner." "Your mother?" I asked. "She died 3 years ago," the woman said, her voice breaking. "But it was her. She was waving at us from the woods. My husband saw her too." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I understand how upsetting that must have been. "You don't understand," the husband cut in. "We all saw her, even the kids. And when we got back to the room, there were scratching sounds at the window all night. We were on the 2nd floor. I helped them finish loading their car, took a brief statement, and watched them drive away, promising to follow up. I knew I wouldn't. There was nothing to follow up on, just another family who had glimpsed the reality of Whitmore. The next week, Owens and I escorted a solo tourist back to the bus stop after he reported something following him back to his hotel room. "It kept scratching at my window all night," he said, clutching his backpack to his chest as we drove him to the edge of town, and whispering my name. "How did it know my name?" "Probably just the wind," Owens said smoothly. "These old buildings make all kinds of noises." "It wasn't the wind," he insisted. "It knew things about me, private things." We watched him board the bus, his face pale and drawn. As the bus pulled away, Owens turned to me. "They never believe us when we tell them it's nothing," she said. "But they also wouldn't believe the truth." "Which is?" "That Whitmore exists in a place where normal rules don't apply." She gestured to the forest that surrounded the town. "The boundaries are thin here. Things cross over that shouldn't." I thought about the faceless figure in the woods, the whispers that knew my father's voice, the white-eyed woman, and the black cat that had saved me from her. "Why here?" I asked. "Why Whitmore?" Owens shrugged. "Some places are just like that, thin spots in the world. Most towns like this either get abandoned or the people adapt. Like with the rules." "Exactly. The rules keep us alive." She looked at me. "You're getting it now, aren't you? This isn't some small town superstition." I nodded slowly. "I'm getting it." As we drove back into town, I watched the trees along the road, wondering what else was out there, watching us. I thought about the family who saw their dead grandmother, the tourist who heard whispers knowing his secrets, and all the other reports that would never make it into official police records. I was beginning to understand that Whitmore existed in a place where normal rules didn't apply, and that understanding, strange as it was, made me feel like I was finally starting to belong here. The patrol car's engine sputtered twice, then died with a sad little whine. I twisted the key again, but got nothing, not even a click. "Come on," I muttered, trying once more. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then went dark. October had brought the first real blizzard of the season to Whitmore, and it was a monster. Snow whipped past the station windows in horizontal sheets, already piling up against the building's north side. The wind howled like something alive, rattling the glass in its frames. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called Lewis. No answer. I tried Owen's next, but her phone went straight to voicemail. The storm must have been affecting cell service. With a sigh, I climbed out of the useless patrol car and trudged back through knee-deep snow to the station entrance. The metal door felt frozen solid as I yanked it open and stepped back inside. At least the power was still working. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their familiar pale glow across the empty desks. I checked my watch. 10:30. The storm had picked up faster than anyone expected. The forecast had called for snow, but nothing like this whiteout that had descended on us with startling speed just after sunset. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, brushing off clumps of snow. Looked like I'd be spending the night here. Not ideal, but not the end of the world either. The station had a small cot in the back room for situations exactly like this one. I made a fresh pot of coffee, then settled at my desk to catch up on paperwork. The wind outside grew louder, occasionally making the building creak and groan around me. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the windows, watching snow pile up against the glass. By 11:30, I'd finished my reports and was starting to think about setting up the cot. I stood, stretched, and walked to the small break room to rinse my coffee mug. That's when the lights flickered, once, twice, before steadying again. "Great," I said to the empty room. "Just what I need." I found a flashlight in my desk drawer just in case and set it nearby. Then I pulled the emergency blanket from the supply closet and headed toward the back room where the cot was stored. The wall clock ticked past midnight as I unfolded the cot. I had just laid the blanket down when I heard it. A high, childlike giggle that seemed to come from the main room. My blood turned to ice. The laughter. Rule 1. Leave the station immediately if you hear a child laughing after dark. I froze, hoping I'd imagined it. But then it came again. A bright, innocent sound that had no business being in an empty police station at midnight during a blizzard. My first instinct was to bolt for the door, but I remembered my dead patrol car and the howling storm outside. Even if I made it to my car, I'd be trapped in a metal box in sub-zero temperatures with no engine. And walking to town in this weather would be suicide. I was stuck. The laughter came again, louder this time, as if moving through the hallway toward me. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I needed a plan, and fast. The supply closet. It had a solid door with a lock. It wasn't ideal, but it was the most defensible space in the station. I grabbed my flashlight and phone, then moved as quietly as possible toward the closet at the far end of the hallway. The laughter seemed to follow me, bouncing off the walls, sometimes sounding like it was right behind me, other times like it was coming from another room entirely. I reached the supply closet, slipped inside, and pulled the door shut as quietly as possible. My shaking hands fumbled with the lock until I heard it click. The space was cramped, barely 6 feet by 4 feet, filled with shelves of office supplies, cleaning products, and extra uniforms. I wedged a metal folding chair under the doorknob for extra security, then sank down to the floor in the corner farthest from the door. My phone showed 1 bar of service. I dialed Owens. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice crackling through static. "Michael? Is that you?" "It's here," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. The laughter. In the station. My car won't start, and I can't... Where are you right now? Her voice was sharp, focused. Supply closet. Lock myself in. Good. Stay there. More static broke up her words. Can't get to you. Storm's too bad. Roads are closed. What do I do? I asked, hating how my voice cracked. Stay in the closet. Don't come out until daylight. Don't respond. Anything it says or does. It feeds on fear and attention. The call dropped. I tried redialing but couldn't get through. Outside the closet, the laughter had stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. I sat perfectly still, straining to hear any sound. For several minutes, there was nothing but the distant howl of the wind and the creaking of the building. Then came footsteps, light, almost delicate. They moved slowly down the hallway, pausing occasionally before continuing. They didn't sound like adult footsteps. Too light, too quick. I held my breath as they approached the closet door, then stopped right outside. The doorknob rattled gently. I stared at it, watching as it turned slightly, testing the lock. The chair wedged beneath it shuddered but held firm. Officer? A child's voice, sweet and innocent, called through the door. Can you help me? I'm lost. I pressed my hand over my mouth, not trusting myself to remain silent otherwise. I know you're in there, the voice said, still childlike but with something else underneath now. Something older, colder. It's not nice to hide from someone who needs help. The doorknob rattled more violently, and the chair legs scraped against the floor as something pushed against the door. I pressed my back hard against the wall, willing myself to become invisible. The pushing stopped. Silence fell again, stretching out for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes according to my watch. Then giggling, right next to my ear, as if something was in the closet with me. I jerked away, sweeping my flashlight beam around the small space. Nothing. I was alone. But the laughter continued, sometimes seeming to come from all directions at once, sometimes whispering directly into my ear. This pattern continued for hours. Sometimes footsteps and laughter. Sometimes silence that stretched my nerves to breaking. Sometimes whispers too quiet to make out, but that somehow felt worse than the laughter. Twice more, something tried the door handle, pushing hard enough to make the chair creak in protest. At 4 a.m, something scratched at the door, long, slow drags that sounded like nails on wood. The sound went on until I wanted to scream just to make it stop. I checked my phone constantly, watching the minutes crawl by. 5 o'clock, 5:30. The battery dipped below 20% and I turned it off to conserve what was left. By 6, my legs had gone numb from sitting on the hard floor, and my back ached fiercely, but I didn't dare move or make a sound. Outside, the footsteps continued their irregular pattern, sometimes rushing past the door, sometimes stopping to listen. At 6:45, I noticed a change. The quality of light seeping under the door had shifted, no longer the harsh fluorescent glow of the station lights, but something softer, grayer. Dawn was breaking. The footsteps receded down the hallway. The laughter came one last time, fainter now, before fading completely. For 30 more minutes, I sat perfectly still, listening. Nothing. When my watch showed 7:30, I finally dared to move the chair and unlock the door. My legs nearly buckled as I stood, pins and needles shooting through my feet. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any sound beyond the normal creaks of the building. Nothing. Slowly, I turned the knob and eased the door open an inch. The hallway was empty, lit by the gray morning light filtering through the windows. I opened the door wider and peered out. The station looked exactly as I had left it, desks in their places, papers stacked neatly, coffee pot where I'd left it in the break room. I stepped into the hallway on shaking legs, half expecting to hear that terrible laughter again. But the only sound was the diminished howl of the wind as the storm began to ease. I checked every room, every corner of the station. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was out of place. If not for my aching body and the chair still sitting in the supply closet, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The snow had stopped falling, though drifts reached halfway up the windows. I turned my phone back on and called Owens. This time the call went through clearly. "You okay?" she asked immediately. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's gone now. Stay there. I'll come get you as soon as the plows clear Main Street." 2 hours later, she arrived with coffee and a grim expression. We didn't talk much as she drove me home. What was there to say? We both knew what had happened. The days and weeks that followed blurred together. Fall gave way to winter, and winter to spring. Before I knew it, a year had passed since I'd first arrived in Whitmore. My first anniversary in town came on a clear day in late April. I sat at my desk in the station looking out at the main street where locals went about their business under a bright blue sky. So normal, so ordinary looking. But I knew better now. I knew about the faceless figures in the woods and the thing that knocked on doors after midnight. I knew about the whispers that called your name and the white-eyed woman who hunted those who hadn't fed the guardian cat. I knew about the laughter that filled empty rooms after dark, and I understood now why Owens had stayed for 8 years, despite everything she'd seen and experienced. Someone had to be here. Someone had to know the rules and enforce them. Someone had to protect the people of Whitmore from the things that lurked just beyond the edges of normal reality. I pulled open my desk drawer and took out the laminated card Lewis had given me on my first day. The 5 rules. Such simple sentences for such vital information. I ran my thumb across the plastic surface, thinking of how I'd nearly dismissed them as superstition or hazing. "Coffee?" Owen stood in the doorway holding 2 steaming mugs. "Thanks." I took one from her, the warmth seeping into my hands. "1 year down," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Thinking of transferring out yet?" I looked at her, then back at the card in my hand. I thought about the family at the Pinewood Inn who'd seen their dead grandmother waving from the trees, about the tourist we'd escorted to the bus stop after something had whispered his secrets through his window all night, about the 6 hours I'd spent locked in a supply closet while something that laughed like a child but wasn't a child at all had tried to get to me. I thought about all the reports we'd never file and all the things the people of Whitmore would never know about what we did to keep them safe. "No," I said, putting the card back in my drawer. "I'm staying." Owens nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "Good. We need you here." She left me with my coffee and my thoughts. Outside, the sun shone on ordinary people living ordinary lives, never knowing what moved in the shadows when they weren't looking, never knowing what rules kept them safe. That was the job. That was my job now. To know the rules, to enforce them, to stand between the people of Whitmore and whatever waited in the darkness beyond. I got the call about the markings around 7 in the morning, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. Lewis's voice on the phone was tense, more clipped than usual. "Need you at the general store?" he said. "Some kind of vandalism overnight." I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The morning air bit at my exposed skin, the kind of cold that made your nostrils stick together when you breathed in. January in Whitmore was brutal, but I'd gotten used to it over the past year. The general store sat in the center of town, its wooden facade weathered by decades of harsh Alaskan winters. As I pulled up, I spotted Lewis standing outside with Stan Miller, the store owner. They both looked up at something above the entrance. "Morning," I said, walking up to them. "What have we got?" Lewis pointed to the area above the door. "Take a look." Carved into the wooden frame was a symbol I'd never seen before, a series of interconnected lines forming what looked like a twisted tree, or maybe a hand with too many fingers. The cuts were precise, deep, made with something sharper than a pocket knife. "When did you notice this?" I asked Stan. "Just opened up about 30 minutes ago. Wasn't there when I closed last night at 8. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the marking. Something about it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why. It wasn't particularly threatening, just lines carved in wood, but looking at it too long made me feel like I was getting dizzy. Anyone see anything? Security cameras? Stan shook his head. Camera's been broken since that storm last month. Haven't gotten around to replacing it. Lewis touched my shoulder. This isn't the only one. Got reports of similar markings at the post office and the clinic. I spent the next hour checking both locations. The symbol at the post office was painted on the front window in something dark red that I hoped wasn't blood. At the clinic, it was scratched into the metal door handle, the same twisted design, but smaller and more intricate. Dr. Kaplan, the town's only physician, stood in the clinic doorway with her arms crossed. "This isn't the first time," she said quietly. "Happened about 4 years ago, too." "What did you do then?" She looked at the symbol, then back at me. We cleaned them off, pretended they weren't there. By mid-morning, I'd documented 7 different locations with the same basic symbol, though each had slight variations. I was taking photos of one carved into a fence post when Owens pulled up in her SUV. She climbed out, her breath clouding in the cold air. "So you've seen them," she said, not really a question. "Yeah, what are they? Gang signs? Some kind of cult thing?" Owens walked over to examine the marking on the fence. "They show up every few years. Always the same pattern. Always overnight." She ran her gloved finger along the carved lines. "Last time was 4 years ago. Before that, 6 years back." "What do they mean?" "Nothing good." Owens looked up at the sky, gray and heavy with snow. "They usually show up before something happens in town." "What kind of something?" 4 years ago, we had 3 disappearances in 1 week. Hikers who went into the forest and never came out. 6 years before that, the temperature dropped so low the pipes froze in every building in town. Old Man Jenkins was found frozen solid in his bed. I studied the symbol again, trying to make sense of it. "So they're what? A warning? More like an announcement." Owens pulled a small can of spray paint from her jacket pocket. "We need to remove them. All of them." "Shouldn't we keep them as evidence?" She shook her head. "You've taken pictures. That's enough. These need to go before nightfall." We spent the rest of the day tracking down and removing every marking we could find. Owens had a system. Spray paint for the ones on walls, sandpaper for wooden surfaces, and a metal file for the few carved into metal. By late afternoon, we'd found and removed 15 of them. "Is that all of them?" I asked as we finished scrubbing the last one from the side of the diner. "Probably not," Owen said, tossing the used rag into a garbage bag. "But it's what we can see. The important thing is, we got the public ones." "What happens now?" Owens looked at her watch. "Now you go on patrol. Keep an eye out for anything unusual." "More unusual than mysterious symbols appearing overnight?" She didn't smile. "Much more unusual. Keep your radio on. Don't engage with anything that doesn't look human. Remember Rule 3. Rule 3. Don't acknowledge the whispers." I'd had enough experience with that one already. "What about you?" I asked. "I'm going to check on some of our more vulnerable residents. Make sure they know to stay inside tonight." I started my patrol at 6, just as darkness settled fully over Whitmore. The streets were already empty. People in town tended to stay home after dark in winter, supernatural entities aside. The cold was reason enough. My first loop around town was uneventful. I drove slowly, watching the houses and buildings, looking for any sign of the symbols returning or anything else out of place. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read -10. Brutal, but normal for January. By 8 o'clock, I'd completed 2 full circuits of the town and was starting my 3rd when I noticed something strange. The temperature display had dropped to -15. 10 minutes later, it read -20. I pulled over and called Owens. "Temperature's dropping fast," I told her. down to 20 below and falling. "Where are you?" Her voice was tight. "Near the elementary school." "Stay in your car. Keep moving but slowly. If you see anything, shapes, movements, anything that shouldn't be there, don't look directly at it. And whatever happens, don't get out of your car." By 9, the temperature had plummeted to 30 below. My car heater was working overtime, and still I could feel the cold seeping in through the windows. The windshield kept trying to frost over, forcing me to run the defroster constantly. That's when I saw it. A dark shape moving between the houses across from the school. At first I thought it might be a person, but it moved wrong. Too fluid, too fast. As it passed by a window, frost patterns bloomed across the glass, spreading like living things. I remembered Rule 3 and kept driving, not acknowledging what I'd seen. More shapes appeared as I continued my patrol, dark, flowing forms that seemed to glide rather than walk. They moved from house to house, pausing at windows and doors. At the Johnson place, I saw one of the shapes press against the front door. Frost spread across the wood in intricate patterns, and for a moment, I thought it might somehow pass through. Then the porch light went out, and the shape moved on. I understood then. They were testing, looking for ways in. I pulled up to the first house where I'd seen activity and knocked on the door. Mrs. Patton, an elderly woman who'd lived in Whitmore for decades, answered with a shotgun in her hands. "It's Officer Diaz," I said quickly. "Just checking on you." She lowered the gun slightly. "You shouldn't be out tonight. I need you to stay inside, keep your lights off, and stay quiet. Don't respond to anything you hear outside." She nodded once, unsurprised. "Not my first winter in Whitmore, young man." I went to as many houses as I could, passing the same warning. Stay inside, lights off, keep quiet. The shapes seemed to avoid my car, moving away whenever I approached, but I could see them returning to houses after I'd passed. By midnight, the temperature had bottomed out at 40 below. My car struggled to stay running, the engine protesting the extreme cold. The shapes had grown more numerous. I counted at least a dozen moving through town, leaving frost patterns wherever they touched. At the Miller house, I saw the shapes gathering at the windows, frost spreading across the glass. Then a light came on inside, and I heard a child's voice. "Daddy, there's someone outside." The shapes pressed closer to the window. The frost patterns grew more intense, spreading faster. I pulled up to the house and hit my siren once. Just a quick burst. The shapes scattered, retreating into the darkness between houses. I went to the door and knocked urgently. Mr. Miller opened it, his face pale. "What's happening?" "Get away from the windows," I said. "Turn off all your lights. Keep everyone quiet." He nodded, fear in his eyes. "The frost—" "Just do what I said. They're attracted to light and sound." I continued my patrol, warning more residents, watching the shapes test homes, then move on when they found no response. One house had frost completely covering every window. The shapes clustered around it. I heard voices inside, tourists probably, who didn't know better. I approached cautiously, using my flashlight to illuminate the house number so I could call it in. As the light touched one of the shapes, it turned toward me, or at least what I assumed was toward me, since it had no discernible face or features, just a darker patch within darkness. I quickly turned off my flashlight and kept moving, heart pounding. Rule 3: don't acknowledge. Throughout the night, I drove slowly through town, watching the shapes test doors and windows, but never entering homes where people remained silent and still. In the houses where light stayed on or voices could be heard, the frost patterns grew thicker, more complex, spreading across entire walls. Around 4 in the morning, I noticed the shapes beginning to retreat. They moved back toward the forest edge, their numbers thinning. By 5, they were gone, and the temperature had begun to rise, creeping back up to 20 below, then 15. Dawn broke around 8, pale winter light washing over Whitmore. The frost patterns remained on windows and doors throughout town, but they were already beginning to melt in the relative warmth of day. I drove back to the station, exhausted from the night's patrol. As I approached the building, something caught my eye. Fresh marks on the station door. I parked and went to investigate. 3 new symbols had been carved into the wood overnight. The same twisted pattern we'd spent the day removing, but larger, more elaborate. They hadn't been there when I'd left for patrol. I stood looking at them, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the cold. Whatever had put these here had done it while I was driving around town, while I was watching the shapes test doors and windows. Or maybe the shapes themselves had done it. I took out my phone and took pictures of the new symbols, then called Owens. We'd removed them once. We'd do it again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of whatever the symbols had come to announce. I woke up to my phone blaring on the nightstand. Fumbling in the dark, I grabbed it, squinting at the screen that showed Owens calling. The clock read 4:38 in the morning. "Diaz," I answered, voice rough with sleep. "We've got a situation." Owens sounded wide awake, tense. Tourist family went hiking yesterday afternoon, never came back to their rental cabin. The Hendersons, mom, dad, 2 kids, 11 and 14. I sat up, already reaching for the lamp. They went into the forest after all the warnings? Dad's some kind of nature photographer. Thought the local superstitions would make for an interesting story to go with his pictures. The disgust in her voice matched what I was feeling. They were explicitly told not to go past the marked trails. The rental owner made them sign a waiver. "Of course he did," I muttered, pulling on my pants one-handed. "Where are you now?" "Station. Lewis is calling people. We need a search party, people who know what they're doing out there." I grabbed my jacket. "I'll be there in 10. The drive to the station took 7 minutes through empty streets. The sky was still pitch black, stars visible in patches between clouds. Whitmore slept, unaware of what was happening. Inside the station, I found Owens and Lewis with 5 locals I recognized. Stan Miller from the general store, Dr. Kaplan, and 3 men who worked at the lumber mill. All of them wore serious expressions and carried heavy-duty flashlights. "Diaz." Lewis nodded at me. "Good. We're all here." He spread a map across the desk. The Hendersons told their rental owner they planned to hike this trail, then set up camp around here. He pointed to an area well beyond the safe hiking paths, deep in the section of forest we all knew to avoid. Stan Miller shook his head. "That's bad territory. Really bad." "Which is why we warned them," Lewis said. "Multiple times." "What's the plan?" I asked, studying the map. Owens pointed to a spot near the forest edge. "We start here, follow their likely path based on what the rental owner told us. We stay together, no exceptions." She looked at each person in turn. "Everyone here knows the rules. If you see something, say something. If you hear something that isn't one of us, ignore it. No one wanders off alone. Period." Everyone nodded. These weren't random volunteers. These were people who knew Whitmore's secrets, who understood what lived in those woods. "Let's move," Lewis said. "We've got maybe 3 hours before sunrise, and I want to be out of those woods by then, if possible." We took 2 vehicles to the trailhead, Lewis's SUV and Owens's patrol car. The temperature was in the low 30s, cold but not unbearable with our layers. Each of us carried a pack with basic supplies, first aid kits, and extra batteries. The lumbermill guys had brought along machetes, which no one questioned. At the forest edge, we gathered in a tight circle. Lewis gave final instructions, his breath visible in the beam of his flashlight. "Radio check every 15 minutes. We move as a unit. Any sign of the family, we call it in immediately." The forest swallowed us as we moved past the tree line. Our flashlights cut through darkness that seemed thicker than normal, beams catching on tree trunks and undergrowth. The trail was clear for the first mile, packed dirt marked by occasional signs warning hikers not to proceed further. Of course, the Hendersons had ignored those warnings. "Tracks here?" One of the mill workers, Jack, I remembered, pointed to broken branches and footprints in the soft earth where the family had left the main path. We followed their trail for another hour, moving deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, closer together. Sounds changed. Fewer normal forest noises, more silence punctuated by occasional rustling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "They came this way for sure," Owen said, crouching to examine fresh tracks. 4 sets of prints, 2 adults, 2 children. The sky had begun to lighten slightly, but the forest remained dark. We pushed on, following the increasingly erratic path the family had taken. They'd started out moving purposefully, but had begun to zigzag, as if unsure which direction to go. "Look," I said, pointing my flashlight at a tree with a strange mark carved into it, similar to the symbols we'd found around town months ago. "This is fresh." "They didn't make that," Stan said quietly. "That was already here." We found 3 more trees marked with similar symbols as we continued. The family's tracks led straight past them, as if drawn forward by the markings. After another half-mile, I spotted something bright blue through the trees. "There," I pointed. "I think that's their tent." We approached cautiously. A small clearing held a campsite, a blue 4-person tent, a portable stove, backpacks scattered around. But something was wrong. The tent had been torn open from the inside. Long rips in the fabric gaped like wounds, the sleeping bags inside thrown about. No blood, but the scene screamed violence. "Jesus," one of the mill workers whispered. I circled the campsite, sweeping my flashlight across the ground. That's when I noticed the tracks. Some looked almost human. Footprints, but wrong. Too long. Toes stretched out like fingers. Others were definitely not footprints at all, but handprints with impossibly elongated fingers, pressed deep into the soft earth. "Owens," I called, keeping my voice low. "Look at these." She crouched beside me, her face grim as she examined the prints. "They're fresh." She crouched beside me, her face grim as she examined the prints. "They're fresh. Made within the last 12 hours. "What makes prints like these?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Owen shook her head. "Nothing you want to meet." She stood up. "The tracks lead that way." The strange prints formed a clear trail heading deeper into the forest, away from the established paths. The family's normal human footprints were mixed in. Adults and children running, based on the depth and spacing. Lewis gathered everyone around. "We need to follow these tracks, but stay tight. No one gets more than 10 feet from the group." We moved forward in formation, flashlights sweeping the ground and trees around us. The forest grew quieter with each step, the normal sounds of birds and insects completely gone. Even the wind seemed to die, leaving us in a bubble of silence broken only by our own breathing and footsteps. The tracks led us through increasingly dense forest for almost a mile before the trees suddenly opened up. We found ourselves at the edge of a perfectly circular clearing about 50 feet across. The trees around it stood at unnaturally even spacing, like they'd been planted deliberately to form the circle. "I've been in these woods for 30 years, Stan whispered. "Never seen this place before." In the center of the clearing, the family's possessions lay arranged in a spiral pattern. Clothes, shoes, watches, phones, wallets, even the children's stuffed animals, all laid out with careful precision. "Don't touch anything," Lewis warned as we approached. I studied the spiral. At its center sat a family photo in a small frame, the Hendersons smiling on a beach somewhere, looking happy and normal. I recognized them from the description. Father with a beard, mother with long brown hair, teenage son and younger daughter. The glass of the frame had been shattered, the photo underneath untouched. "Where are they?" Dr. Kaplan asked, looking around the clearing. That's when I heard it. The same high-pitched giggle I'd heard at the station months ago. Child's laughter coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Nobody move," I said quietly. Nobody respond. The laughter circled us, joined by whispers too faint to make out words, but somehow familiar. I kept my eyes on the spiral of possessions, refusing to look toward the sounds. "We should split up," Jack suddenly announced, his voice flat. "Cover more ground." I turned to look at him. His eyes were fixed on the tree line, and he took a step away from our group. "No," Lewis said firmly. We stay together. "I think I see something over there," Stan said, also stepping away. "Just going to check." Something was very wrong. Two more of our group began drifting in different directions, eyes vacant, ignoring Lewis's commands to stay put. Owens grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "We need to leave, now," she hissed. "But the family," I started. "They're gone," she cut me off. "And we will be too if we don't move." The whispers grew louder, and the laughter changed, becoming deeper, more adult. The 3 mill workers were already at the edge of the clearing, each heading in a different direction into the trees. "Jack, Pete, come back," Lewis called, but they showed no sign of hearing him. Dr. Kaplan started walking toward the center of the spiral. I grabbed his jacket, but he shrugged me off with surprising strength. "Michael, now!" Owens yanked me backward. "Lewis, we have to go." Lewis hesitated for just a second, then nodded sharply. "Back the way we came. Run." We turned and sprinted from the clearing, leaving the others behind. The whispers followed us, growing angrier, more insistent. The child's laughter morphed into something that sounded like screaming. I ran between Owens and Lewis, trying to follow the path we'd taken. The forest seemed different now. Trees closer together, undergrowth thicker, branches reaching like hands. I caught my jacket on something and tore free without looking back. Movement flickered between the trees. Pale shapes, too tall and thin to be human, kept pace with us just out of clear sight. I saw long limbs, stretched faces, fingers that dragged along the ground. They never fully emerged into view, staying in the shadows, but always visible enough to know they were there. "Don't look at them," Owens panted beside me. "Keep running." My lungs burned. Branches whipped at my face. I stumbled over roots but kept going, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Lewis was a few steps ahead, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he ran. We broke through a dense patch of trees, and suddenly the path was clear again. The marked trail we'd started on hours ago. The pale figures stopped at the edge of the deeper forest, watching us with eyes I couldn't quite see but could feel. We didn't slow down until we reached the trailhead and our vehicles. I bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. Owens leaned against her patrol car, face pale and slick with sweat. Lewis stood looking back at the forest, his expression grim. "The others," I managed between breaths. "They're gone," Lewis said flatly. "We can't just leave them," I argued, though my voice lacked conviction. I knew what I'd seen. "They were gone the moment they decided to walk away," Owens said. "Whatever's in there wanted them to separate from us, and it got what it wanted." The sky had lightened to early dawn gray. The forest looked almost normal in the growing light. Just trees and undergrowth. Nothing sinister. But I knew better now. "What about the family?" I asked. Lewis shook his head. "We'll report them missing, file the paperwork, but they're not coming back." This has happened before, I realized, looking between them. "Every few years," Owens confirmed. "Someone ignores the warnings, goes too deep. Sometimes we find parts of them. Usually nothing." We stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had happened settling over us. 5 people from our search party gone. A family of 4 vanished, and whatever took them was still out there, watching from the trees. "Let's go," Lewis finally said. "We need to tell the others what happened." As we drove away, I looked back one last time at the forest edge. For just a second, I thought I saw a small figure standing between the trees, a child-sized silhouette, hand raised as if waving goodbye. Then it stepped backward and was gone, leaving nothing but shadows and silent trees. I first noticed something was wrong when I spotted the white-eyed woman watching me from across the street. She stood completely still between the hardware store and the post office. Her two wide mouths stretched into that familiar, hungry smile. I'd fed the black cat that morning, watched it eat half my breakfast sandwich right in front of me, but the protection wasn't working anymore. I kept walking, pretending I hadn't seen her. My hand stayed close to my holster as I continued my patrol down Main Street. When I looked back, she was gone, but the cold feeling between my shoulder blades told me she hadn't gone far. The next day, the whispers started. I was filing reports at my desk when I heard my name from the supply closet. "Michael," the voice said, using my father's exact tone. "Come here, son." I kept typing, remembering Rule 3. Don't acknowledge the whispers. But they didn't stop when I ignored them. They grew louder, following me from room to room. By afternoon, they'd become a constant background noise. My mother, my father, old friends, ex-girlfriends, all calling my name, telling me secrets, asking me questions. "It's not working," I told Owens when she came in for her shift. "I'm following the rules, but they're not stopping." She looked at me with those steady blue eyes that had seen more than I could imagine. "Lewis called. We need to meet him at the town hall. Now." "What's happening?" "The rules are changing." We took her SUV. Outside, the sky hung low and gray despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. As we drove, I noticed more of the white-eyed women standing on corners, watching our car pass. They didn't try to hide anymore. "You see them too?" I asked. Owens nodded. "They're getting bolder. It's starting." "What's starting?" She didn't answer, just drove faster through Whitmore's empty streets. The town hall was a 2-story wooden building that doubled as the community center. Inside, Chief Lewis waited with 6 elderly residents I recognized from around town. Mrs. Patton, who'd greeted me with a shotgun during the frost night. Stan Miller from the general store. Dr. Kaplan. 3 others whose names I couldn't remember, but whose faces I knew. "Good, you're here," Lewis said, his weathered face more lined than usual. "Close the door." I shut it behind us, noticing the fresh symbols carved into the wooden frame, the same twisted tree pattern we'd found all over town months ago. "Michael," Lewis said, "you've been with us almost 2 years now. You've learned our rules, seen what happens when they're broken." "Yes, sir." "But the rules aren't working anymore, are they?" I shook my head. "The white-eyed woman is back. She watches me even though I fed the cat. And the whispers, they don't stop when I ignore them." The oldest man in the room, Jake Erickson, I suddenly remembered, nodded slowly. "It's time again." Lewis turned to the group. "Every 30 years, the boundaries between Whitmore and the other side weaken significantly. The rules that normally protect us aren't enough during this time." "The other side?" I asked. "You've seen enough to know there's something beyond our world," Owens said. "A place where these things come from. Normally, the rules keep the boundary strong enough that only a few things slip through. But every 30 years, Dr. Kaplan continued, the boundary thins to almost nothing. The last time was in 1993. Before that, 1963. Mrs. Patton, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, spoke up. "My husband was police chief in 63. We lost 17 people before we figured out how to strengthen the boundaries." "And in 93? I asked. "We were prepared," Lewis said. "We only lost 3. The room fell silent. I thought about the Henderson family and the search party members we'd lost in the forest. How many more would disappear if we didn't act? So, what do we do? I asked. Stan Miller reached into a wooden box on the table and pulled out two objects, flat stones about the size of my palm, each carved with the same symbol we'd been finding around town. Leather cords threaded through holes at the top made them into crude necklaces. These are boundary markers, he explained, handing one to me and one to Owens. Made from stones from the river that runs under Whitmore, carved with the old symbols. The stone felt warm in my hand, almost alive. The carving seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. You two will place larger markers at specific points around the town's perimeter, Lewis explained. These amulets will help you complete the circle safely. The winter solstice is in 3 days. The boundary will be at its weakest then. If we don't complete the circle before midnight on the solstice, Mrs. Patton added, the boundary will collapse completely. I slipped the cord over my head, letting the stone rest against my chest. And if that happens? No one answered immediately. Finally, Dr. Kaplan said, Whitmore stops existing as we know it. We started the next morning. Owens picked me up before dawn, her SUV loaded with 20 stone markers, each the size of a cinder block and carved with the same twisted tree symbol as our amulets. The elders prepared these, she explained as we drove to the first location, the northern edge of town where the main road met the forest. They've been working on them since the first symbols appeared months ago. So those carvings around town, they were warnings? Yes. The other side was marking its territory, showing where the boundary would weaken first. We parked at the roadside. The forest looked darker than usual, the trees pressed closer together. I helped Owens carry the first marker to a spot she identified at the exact edge of the tree line. Here, she said, dig down about a foot. I used the shovel we'd brought, cutting through the frozen ground with difficulty. When the hole was deep enough, Owens placed the stone marker inside, symbol facing up. Now we need to activate it, she said, touching her amulet. I did the same, and for a moment, I felt a strange vibration pass between the stone at my chest and the one in the ground. Did you feel that? I asked. She nodded. It's connected now. 19 more to go. We worked through the day, placing markers at precise intervals around Whitmore's perimeter. Some locations were easy to reach, the beach at the southern edge, the hill overlooking the eastern neighborhoods. Others required pushing deep into the forest, where I felt watched with every step. Don't look directly at them, Owens warned as we placed the 7th marker near an old logging trail. They're gathering. From the corner of my eye, I saw them. Pale figures standing between distant trees, their limbs too long, their movements too fluid. The faceless ones I'd encountered before, but also new shapes I couldn't quite make out. They know what we're doing, I said quietly. Yes, they're trying to stop us. We finished 8 markers that first day. As we drove back into town at dusk, I noticed how the streetlights seemed dimmer, the shadows between buildings deeper. A child's laugh echoed down an empty side street, though no children were visible. It's happening during the day now, I said. Owens gripped the steering wheel tighter. The boundary is weakening faster than expected. The second day was worse. We placed 6 more markers, but the resistance grew stronger. The whispers followed us everywhere, sometimes so loud they drowned out our actual conversations. Twice we had to change our planned locations when we found white-eyed women standing exactly where we needed to place a marker. They're learning, Owens said as we detoured around a particularly dense section of forest where multiple pale figures stood watching. Adapting. In town, people stayed indoors. The few who ventured out moved quickly, eyes down, hurrying to their destinations. I spotted 3 black cats sitting in a row on the general store's porch, watching the street with unblinking yellow eyes. That night, something scratched at my apartment door for hours, I sat on my bed with my gun in my lap, the amulet clutched in my other hand, listening to the constant scraping and occasional whispers of my name. On the third day, the winter solstice, we had 6 markers left to place. The sky never fully brightened, stuck in a perpetual gray twilight. As we drove to our first location of the day, I saw dark shapes moving between houses, leaving frost patterns on windows and doors. "Those are the same things from the frost night," I said. "Yes," Owens replied. "The cold ones. They shouldn't be here until after dark." We worked faster, racing against time in the growing supernatural presence. At our 4th marker of the day, a faceless figure stepped directly into our path. It stood perfectly still, blocking the spot where we needed to dig. "What do we do?" I whispered, remembering Rule 2, don't move if you see a faceless person in the woods. Owen slowly raised her amulet. "Hold yours up too." I lifted the stone, and the faceless figure took a single step backward, its head tilted in what might have been confusion. Owens moved forward, amulet extended, and the creature retreated another step, then another, until it disappeared among the trees. "The amulets give us some protection," she explained, "but it won't work on all of them, and it won't last forever." By late afternoon, we had placed 18 markers. 2 remained, and the sun was setting. The forest had grown so dark it looked like midnight beneath the trees, and the sounds, whispers, laughter, scratching, had become constant. "The last 2 need to go in the town square," Owen said as we drove back toward Whitmore. "They complete the circle." The town looked abandoned. No lights shone from windows. No smoke rose from chimneys. But I knew people were inside, hiding, waiting. As we parked at the edge of the square, I saw them. Dozens of entities gathered around the perimeter. White-eyed women standing perfectly still. Faceless figures swaying slightly. Dark shapes flowing across the ground like living shadows. And new things I'd never seen before. Tall, skeletal creatures with too many joints. Small, child-sized figures with glowing red eyes. Humanoid shapes that seemed to shift and change as I watched them. "They know these are the last markers," Owen said quietly. "They're trying to stop us from completing the circle." Lewis emerged from the town hall, followed by the elders. They joined us at the SUV, each wearing an amulet identical to ours. "It's worse than 93, Mrs. Patton said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We need to place both remaining markers simultaneously," Lewis explained. "One at the north end of the square, one at the south." "At exactly midnight," Dr. Kaplan added, checking his watch. "We have 17 minutes." Owens took one marker, and I took the other. The stone felt heavier than before, almost pulling toward the ground. "We'll create a distraction," Stan Miller said, holding up his amulet. "The rest of us will walk the perimeter, drawing their attention while you 2 place the markers." The elders spread out, moving to different sides of the square. Lewis gave me a nod. "Good luck, son." I watched the old man walk away, straight-backed and determined despite the gathering darkness. These people had done this before. They'd protected their town for generations. Now it was my turn. The elders began walking the square's edge, holding their amulets high. The entities turned toward them, some following, others shrinking back. The distraction was working. "Now," Owens whispered, "go." I ran across the square to the northern point, marker clutched against my chest. The laughter grew louder with every step, echoing from all directions. I reached the spot and dropped to my knees, digging frantically at the frozen ground. Across the square, I could see Owens doing the same at the southern point. Between us, the entities had noticed our movement. Several white-eyed women turned away from the elders, their 2 wide mouths opening as they started toward me. "Hurry!" Lewis shouted from somewhere to my right. I dug faster, breaking through the frost layer into the dirt below. The hole wasn't deep enough, but it would have to do. I placed the marker inside, symbol facing up. just as the first white-eyed woman reached the edge of my peripheral vision. "Don't look at her," I reminded myself, focusing on the marker. "Michael," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of Owen's. "Help me." I touched my amulet to the marker, feeling that now familiar vibration. Across the square, I saw Owens doing the same. "It's midnight," Dr. Kaplan called out. "Now!" I pressed the amulet harder against the marker, and suddenly a blue light sparked between them. The light shot outward, racing along invisible lines toward the other markers we'd placed around town. The white-eyed woman screamed, a sound no human throat could make, and backed away. All around the square, the entities retreated as blue light connected each marker, forming a glowing web that encircled Whitmore. The light rose upward, creating a dome-like barrier that pushed the darkness back. The whispers faded. The laughter stopped. The entities pressed against the barrier, testing it but couldn't break through. Their shapes became less distinct, fading like mist as the boundary strengthened. I stayed kneeling by the marker, watching as the blue light pulsed once, twice, 3 times, then settled into a steady, subtle glow. Across the square, Owen stood up, exhaustion evident in her posture but relief in her face. The elders gathered in the center of the square, their amulets still glowing faintly. Lewis helped me to my feet. "It worked," I said, hardly believing it. "Yes," he replied. "The boundary is reinforced. It will hold for another 30 years. I looked toward the forest edge, where the darkness had receded to its normal levels. The entities were gone, pushed back to whatever place they'd come from. But I knew they weren't gone forever. They were waiting, watching from the other side of a barrier that would eventually thin again. "So now the rules will work again?" I asked. Mrs. Patton nodded. "The rules will protect us, as they have for generations." I touched the amulet at my chest, feeling its warmth. "And these?" "Keep it," Lewis said. "You're a guardian of Whitmore now. You've earned it." As we walked back toward the police station, I felt the weight of what we'd done, what I'd become. I wasn't just an officer anymore. I was a protector of boundaries, a keeper of rules that separated our world from something much darker. The solstice had passed, the barrier held. But as I looked up at the night sky, now visible as the unnatural darkness retreated, I knew this was just one cycle in a much longer story. 30 years would pass, and Whitmore would need protection again, and I planned to be ready when that time came. I stood with Owens and the elders at the town square, watching the midnight sky darken to pitch black as the winter solstice reached its peak. The stone marker sat heavy in my hands, its carved symbol facing upward, waiting to complete the protective circle we'd spent days creating around Whitmore. "Almost time," Lewis said, checking his watch. 2 minutes to midnight. The air felt wrong, too thick, too cold, pressing against my skin like an actual weight. I looked toward the forest edge where the streetlights couldn't reach. Something moved there, flowing between houses like black smoke. "You see that?" I asked Owens, pointing toward the darkness. She nodded, her face tight. "It's starting. They know what we're doing." The darkness spread from the tree line, flowing like fog between buildings and across yards. Not just shadows, this was something physical that dimmed lights as it passed. The whispers started then, first as a gentle hiss that might have been wind, then growing louder until they surrounded us from all directions. "Michael," they called, using my father's voice, then my mother's, then voices I didn't recognize at all. "Michael, stop what you're doing." Mrs. Patton clutched her amulet tighter, the leather cord wrapped around her wrist. "Don't listen," she warned. "They'll say anything." The whispers grew to a chorus, dozens of voices talking at once until I couldn't make out individual words anymore. Just a wall of sound that made my head throb. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were somehow inside my head. "Look," Stan Miller pointed toward Main Street. Pale figures emerged from the darkness. white-eyed women with 2 wide mouths standing perfectly still at the edge of the square. Behind them, faceless people moved with jerky, unnatural steps. I counted a dozen, then 20, then gave up as more appeared. A high, childish laugh cut through the whispers, echoing across the square. I'd heard that laugh before, trapped in the station closet all night. Now it came from everywhere at once, bouncing between buildings. "There are more of them than I've ever seen," Dr. Kaplan whispered, his face ashen. "Many more than last time." New shapes moved among the familiar ones, tall, skeletal figures that bent at impossible angles and small, hunched creatures that crawled on all fours with backward-facing heads. I hadn't seen these before in my year at Whitmore. Their eyes caught the streetlight and reflected it back red. "They're testing the boundary," Lewis said, pointing to where several white-eyed women had reached the edge of town where we'd buried the first marker. The women pressed forward but stopped suddenly, as if hitting an invisible wall. They placed pale hands against nothing I could see, pushing with increasing force. The air seemed to ripple where they touched it. "It's holding," Owen said, "but they're pushing harder than before." More entities gathered at the boundary lines, pressing against the invisible barrier from all sides. The pressure in the air increased until my ears popped. The whispers grew to screams. "It's time," Lewis announced, checking his watch. "Midnight exactly. Now!" Owens nodded at me and we split up, running to opposite sides of the town square. I reached the north end, dropped to my knees, and placed the stone marker in the shallow hole we'd dug earlier. The twisted tree symbol faced upward, its carved lines seeming to move in the dim light. I pulled my amulet from beneath my jacket, the stone warm against my palm despite the freezing air. Across the square, Owens did the same with her marker. "Now," Lewis called. I pressed my amulet to the marker. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the stone beneath my hand vibrated, sending a jolt up my arm. A blue light sparked from the carved symbol, racing along invisible lines toward the other markers we'd placed around town. The light connected all 20 points, forming a glowing dome that arced over Whitmore. Where the light touched the gathered entities, they shrieked, a sound no human throat could make. The white-eyed women recoiled, their faces twisted in rage. The faceless figures jerked backward as if pulled by strings. The boundary pulsed once, twice, 3 times, each flash brighter than the last. The entities retreated with each pulse, some crawling, some running, all moving back toward the forest. The child's laughter turned to a wail that faded as the light strengthened. The dome settled into a steady glow, visible only as a faint blue shimmer at the edge of vision. The pressure in the air eased. The whispers stopped. I stayed kneeling by the marker, breathing hard, watching as the last of the entities vanished into the trees. The town felt suddenly empty, as if holding its breath. "It worked," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the sudden quiet. Owens walked over, her face showing the same mixture of relief and exhaustion I felt. "It worked," she agreed, "for another 30 years. We returned to the center of the square where Lewis and the elders waited. The old-timers looked relieved but not surprised. They'd seen this before. "Good job," Lewis said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not everyone makes it through their first boundary reinforcement." "What happens now?" I asked. "We wait," Mrs. Patton answered. "They'll test it for a few days, but they know the rules. They can't cross a fresh boundary." We stood in silence as the night slowly gave way to dawn. The gray light spread across the square, touching the buildings and streets of Whitmore. With daylight, the last of the supernatural pressure seemed to fade. Birds began to sing in the trees, normal birds making normal sounds. "Go home, get some sleep," Lewis told us. "You've earned it." The elders dispersed, heading to their homes with the practiced calm of people who had faced the darkness and survived it many times. Lewis walked with them, leaving me alone with Owens in the square. "Now you understand," she said, not a question. Yeah, I nodded. I do. I looked down at the amulet in my hand, the carved stone that had seemed so strange when I first received it. Now it felt like a part of me, a weight I would carry from this point forward. Not just a protective charm, but a symbol of responsibility. This is why Whitmore needs officers who follow the rules, I said. We're not just protecting ourselves. Owens nodded. We maintain the boundary, every day in small ways. The rules keep the separation intact between our world and theirs. The solstice reinforcement is just the big one. I tucked the amulet back under my jacket, feeling it rest against my chest. A year ago, I would have dismissed all this as superstition or mass delusion. Now I knew better. Whitmore existed at the edge of reality, and people like me stood at that edge keeping watch. I need coffee, Owens said. Coming? In a bit, I replied. I want to check something first. After she left, I walked the perimeter of the square, looking out toward the forest where the entities had retreated. In the daylight, it looked like any other stretch of Alaskan wilderness. Tall pines, snow-covered ground, nothing moving but birds and wind. But I knew what waited beyond the trees now. I understood Whitmore's peculiar position between realities, and my role as its guardian. The amulet would stay with me, a permanent reminder of my duty to this strange little town. I was ready for whatever came next.